From the historic campus of Hillsdale College in Hillsdale, Michigan, where the good, the true, and the beautiful are taught, nurtured, and honored, this is the Radio Free Hillsdale Hour, bringing the activity and education of the college to listeners across the country.
There are subcultures that produce lots of new words, and some of them are more spontaneously created. Journalists and other public writers, notoriously, gangsters and drug addicts have been among the more creative people linguistically.
This is your host, Scot Bertram. Welcome to the Radio Free Hillsdale Hour, part of the Hillsdale College Podcast Network. That was Dr. Patricia Bart, Associate Professor of English here at Hillsdale College. We continue later on in today's program, diving into the history of the English language with Dr. Bart. First, we're joined by Congressman Mike Waltz. He represents Florida's 6th Congressional District, the first Green Beret in Congress, former White House and Pentagon Special Advisor, and his new book is Hard Truths, Think and Lead Like a Green Beret. Congressman, thanks so much for joining us.
Hey, great to be with you, and always appreciate all the great work that Hillsdale does.
I appreciate that. I want to begin by asking about the definition of a Green Beret. People know the phrase, perhaps, but don't know what makes them unique and special. What is a Green Beret?
Yeah, it's one of the reasons I wrote the book. I get asked all the time, by people who understand that we're an elite force, U.S. Army Special Forces. But what's the difference in a Green Beret, a U.S. Navy SEAL, a U.S. Army Ranger? What do they do? How do they think? How do they operate that's differently? And I think the easiest way to explain it is that the SEALs and the Rangers are the best of the world at finding bad guys anywhere in the world, going in the middle of the night, as they did with Osama bin Laden in that raid in 2011, putting 2 bullets on the forehead and getting out and taking care of our nation's bad guys. They can run, but they can't hide forever. Green Berets are somewhat different in that we can do those types of raids, absolutely, but we tend to be older. We operate in smaller teams, sometimes as small as 3 or 4. And we learn multiple languages. We specialize in various parts of the world. We embed with locals often. We have to blend in and specialize in local cultures. And so you'll take just a few of us, maybe 6, 8, a dozen, and put us with a tribe, with a militia, we specialize in guerrilla warfare, insurgency, and counterinsurgency, and we'll train and operate by, with, and through 1,000 up to 10,000 locals to kind of take care of our nation's business for us. And we tend to stay much longer, be embedded in a way that is kind of much more fulsome. And again, we say we have the operational term kind of by, with, and through. We would rather find our friends and have them take care of our enemies for us. And so it is a unique mindset that we have to have. And now as a member of Congress, I say in the book, if I can build coalitions of militias or tribes or warlords in Africa, Afghanistan, then I can handle the tribes in the swamp. Although sometimes they're a little bit tougher than the ones overseas.
Congressman Mike Waltz is with us. His new book, Hard Truths, Think and Lead Like a Green Beret. And you have all these attributes, different chapters, attributes that you learned and that you continue to exemplify from your career as a Green Beret. We'll walk through a few of those. Restraint is the very first attribute, and there are many examples of restraint you had to show. A story about making the decision about whether or not to throw sniper fire onto what looked to be like a 12-year-old boy during your service. I was curious about the difference between the kind of restraint in the examples that you show in Hard Truths, and we hear restraint in a different way today with regards to Israel, and people on the left saying Israel must show restraint against Hezbollah. They must show restraint against Hamas. What's the difference between the restraint that you talk about in Hard Truths and the type of restraint that is meant by the left and those who would call for Israel to essentially stand down at this time?
Well, I think it's how you apply it, both tactically and strategically. For example, what I talk about in the book that you mentioned, a 10-year-old little boy, we saw through our sniper scope every time he picked up his cell phone and binoculars, another mortar round came in on our position. And after watching that for a few minutes and several rounds came in, my sniper asked for permission to kill the little boy. This is happening again, in kind of the blink of an eye. I'm the father. I thought about my little girl at the time that was the same age. I told him to fire a warning shot, and rather than kill him, he did. The little boy ran into his village. We followed him in. It turned out the Taliban had been in the village that morning, lined up all the families and said, give your oldest son to go fight the Americans or else. One family refused, and they hung their little boy. Was restraint in that moment the right call? I think so. Would I be saying that if I were saying that to the parents of one of my Green Berets that little boy had killed? I don't know. But I go through moments in history, to your point. H.W. Bush Sr. in the first Gulf War showed restraint in that we only went in Kuwait. We liberated Kuwait. Many wanted him to go all the way to Baghdad to take out Saddam. He showed restraint, and I think that was the right call. I think Grant showing restraint on Lee was the right call at the time. And to your point with Iran, if you go back to the Trump administration, remember they attacked our shipping. Mm-hmm. Trump didn't hit back. They attacked Saudi oil fields. They hit back. It wasn't until they crossed the red line of killing an American and storming our embassy that Trump then took out Soleimani, their field general. Sometimes you have to punch the bully in the mouth. You have to escalate to de-escalate, and that not only restored stability in the region. We were eventually signing peace accords with the Abraham Accords on the White House lawn. That's very different than what's happening now with the Biden administration. They're not showing restraint. They are showing concession after concession after concession. They're operating through a lens of appeasement. To take the schoolyard bully analogy, they're the kids that just said, if I give a little more lunch money, maybe I throw in my ham sandwich too, that the bully will be nice. And we know what happens in that environment. There is a difference in restraint and appeasement. What we're seeing out of this administration is appeasement and weakness, and the bully Iran taking full advantage of it.
Discipline. There's a story in Hard Truths by Congressman Mike Waltz about saving Skittles in the midst of Green Beret training. And we actually learned a few times in the book how close you came to not being a Green Beret, how close you perhaps came to being kicked out of that training. But this particular lesson was about that discipline not just being for you, but also being for the benefit of others. Is that a difficult lesson to learn?
Well, I certainly learned it somewhat the hard way, and that in Ranger training, starvation and sleep deprivation is part of what you go through. Can you still lead and conduct a mission to standard and all of that? And in one case, we had completely run out of food. We missed our resupply, but I had saved these little. They're like the size that kind of you give during Halloween. These little travel-sized pockets, and I had saved it. Man, every time I popped one of those in my mouth, it was like this explosion of energy, and I'll never look at seeing my buddies staring at me, salivating. And my initial thought was, you know what? I had the discipline to save a little bit of food. You didn't, buddy. Sucks to be you. I did the right thing. And my instructor afterwards, you get evaluated by your peers, and they hit me for it. I didn't think that was fair. I had discipline. They didn't. You know what he said to me? He said, what would Jesus have done? You comport yourself to be a Christian. What would he have done in that situation? This was a sergeant, a Ranger sergeant, my evaluator, and I'll never forget it. I said, you know what, Sergeant? He would have given his whole pack. That having discipline as a leader doesn't mean you just take care of yourself. You have the discipline to take care of others, even when they are weak. And so it was just a powerful lesson that how you need to live your faith and live your values, even in the toughest of circumstances.
That's Congressman Mike Waltz of Florida, U.S. Army Special Forces retired. We'll continue in a moment with conversation about his new book, Hard Truths, Think and Lead Like a Green Beret. Let me take a quick moment, though, to encourage you to check out The Larry Arnn Show, part of the Hillsdale College Podcast Network. In fact, go now to podcast.hillsdale.edu, click the subscribe button. That will take you to links to subscribe to The Larry Arnn Show via Apple Podcasts, via Spotify, via Amazon, or via YouTube. On The Larry Arnn Show, Hillsdale College President Larry Arnn sits down with guests of the college to talk about topics of enduring relevance. Recent episodes include Alan Gelzo on Abraham Lincoln's vision of democracy, artificial intelligence and the human soul, a conversation with two Hillsdale College professors. Best-selling novelist Dean Koontz sat down to talk about the novel and the nature of evil. And very soon, new episodes featuring Kevin Roberts of the Heritage Foundation and noted historian Andrew Roberts. Subscribe to The Larry Arnn Show at podcast.hillsdale.edu. Click the subscribe button, or you can also do it wherever you find your audio. That's The Larry Arnn Show at podcast.hillsdale.edu. Click subscribe and find your favorite provider. Continuing now with Congressman Mike Waltz, his brand new book, Hard Truths, Think and Lead Like a Green Beret. Congressman, we can't get to all of these attributes. I commend readers to read the chapter on loyalty, which takes us through the Bo Bergdahl story. Very affecting. I wanted to ask about resilience. There are just incredible stories up and down in Hard Truths. We learn about Ken Dwyer in this resilience chapter and others who have lost limbs, eyes, a foot. Congressman, what possesses someone who has had that experience to want to return and continue to serve?
It's a little bit difficult to talk about in some ways, in that, we as a nation have an obligation to take care of our wounded warriors. We haven't always done a good job. Now we've done a much better job over the years, but I talk about these Green Berets of mine. One of them, Andre Murnane, who lost his foot, and the system is now so conditioned to, hey, give you an honorable discharge, give you a disability payment, kind of take care of you. They didn't know what to do with him because he said, I don't want any of that. I don't want any of it. I just want to get back to my team. And 9 months after having his foot taken off, with a prosthetic, he was the first to go back into airborne operations. And I'll never forget us both jumping together and him landing on that prosthetic foot. You hit pretty hard. He just wanted to get back to serve again with his buddies, and that servant's heart cannot be stopped. He literally probably turned down what would amount to millions over a lifetime in disability payments to get back with his Special Forces team. I don't know what, at the end of the day, what drives people, but I know it's there. And I know it's there in certain individuals to want to serve that badly, to be with their buddies, to take care of those of the left and the right, and defend this great nation. I talk about Ken Dwyer, who's now a colonel still in the Green Berets that lost an eye, an arm, and a leg in a firefight. And please read his story, because but for his medic, who he gave his final instruction before he passed out, don't let him take my other arm. And the medic literally jumped in the way of the Army surgeon who was about to take his other arm off as well in the operating room. I mean, these stories of heroism are what Americans need to hear and what we need to celebrate. The old adage, my heroes wear camouflage, not capes or, Adidas or Nike shoes. These are the folks we need to elevate in American society. And that story of resilience today, I think in America that has gotten kind of soft in many ways, need to hear these hard truths of how people thrive and survive.
Congressman Mike Waltz, retired U.S. Army Special Forces. His book, Hard Truths, Think and Lead Like a Green Beret. The chapter on boldness. I don't know if you know the author or the writer John Gabriel, but he has this discussion about boldness and controversy. When something on the left is proposed, it's always described as bold in the media. When something on the right is proposed, it's always described as controversial, even though something bold is by definition controversial, right? You have examples in the book, Governor Ron DeSantis and his boldness in leadership in COVID that was successful. But I think back to, say, like President George W. Bush and his boldness in proposing that Social Security be privatized, and he spent a lot of political capital. It was a bold idea. It was also controversial, and it did not succeed. How can leaders continue to be bold in the face of both A, controversy, and B, occasional failure?
You very much have to have a moral compass, a very clear idea of kind of what that North Star is. I firmly believe as a Christian that's underscored by faith. But I not only talk about those ideas, I talk about, George Washington, who was completely on his back foot, his army starving. The Congress wasn't giving him the support that he needs, and what does he do? He goes on offense at Princeton and has the bold Christmas Day attack that takes out the British and then their German mercenaries, the Hessians, and really saves the Continental Army. Or even in modern day, President Trump instinctively understood that you couldn't be first in the world. We can't continue to be a global leader, number one in the world, if you're number two in space. And he was briefed on what the Russians and what the Chinese are doing in space, how dependent our economy is on what's up there. And he said, well, we've got to create a space force to defend it. You remember all the jokes, making fun of him. You know what, in hindsight, how right he was. Well, his Air Force secretary at the time was dragging her feet. She had kind of, were listening to the generals rather than the president who put her there. He fired her by tweet. You know what? Kind of a mean thing to do, kind of a jerk thing to do, people were saying at the time, but the Pentagon got the message. The generals were in my office the next day to help me pass the legislation to create the Space Force. And so that was a bold move. Everybody in the bureaucracy and the media and everybody else were mocking it and making fun of it. But now we see with what Elon Musk is doing, what commercial space is doing, Starlink and all of these newest systems in this new economy. And I think it just takes people that say, batten down the hatches. We are going to do what I know to be right and move forward.
The chapter on speaking truth to power, you write, the thing about speaking truth to power is once you start, it inspires others. And there are stories in the book about some tense meetings with Donald Rumsfeld, a meeting with superiors in which you tell the truth about the status of the Afghan army, and others then contribute their thoughts and ideas as well. When is that time when a leader must speak, even if it is out of turn or perhaps unacceptable on a by-the-rule basis?
Well, I don't know that you have to be prepared for it, I think, when that moment hits, right? And you never quite know when that moment is going to be. I also tell the story of the Chief of Staff of the Army, George C. Marshall, who was dealing with a very difficult, mercurial, sometimes hot-tempered president in Franklin Delano Roosevelt, who had fired a number of people in his cabinet. Sounds a little bit analogous to modern day as well. And FDR was determined. He had made a decision. He slapped his desk. He was going to put in place budget cuts for the Defense Department, for the War Department at the time. This is like 1938, 1939. George C. Marshall saw what was happening with Germany, saw what was happening with Japan, and he took that moment in the Oval Office to challenge the president. Really kind of took everybody by surprise, and he walked out of the office thinking, okay, I'm waiting on the pink slip. The president invited him back the next day and gave him 10 minutes to make his case, he did. And not only did the president reverse course, he asked Congress for a budget increase. And I think that saved it saved the world in the precipice of World War II. He was prepared in that moment. He had the facts at hand to talk about Germany and Japan's military buildup and what was really going on. And he wasn't afraid to lose his career to put it all on the line, to speak truth to power. But there's an opposite side of that I also talk about now that I'm in a position somewhat of authority. When you're in power, you have to be prepared to listen to truth when it's being spoken to. And when someone is challenging kind of the direction that you've decided to go. And if they're doing it in a substantive way, in a respectful way, you have to be open to that. And I try my best to be open to it as well with my team and my constituents and when people are coming to me.
Congressman Mike Waltz, his book is Hard Truths, Think and Lead Like a Green Beret. I know we're running out of time. I want to tell people that there was great stories and great reflections on the Afghanistan withdrawal from 2021, all those things that went wrong. I want to close by asking about the vigilance chapter, though. You say that your role, your mission now in Congress is to do everything you can to prevent a conflict with China. How does leading like a Green Beret help us avoid conflict with a major power like China?
Well, we have to be adaptable. We have to be flexible. I hate, the term is so overused of thinking out of the box, but when it comes to an adversary like China, they saw in the first Gulf War that America is the best in the world with tanks, planes, ships, precision weapons. So defeating us head to head, they figured out, decades ago, would be very tough to do. So they've embarked on asymmetrical warfare. How can they take us on in cyber, in space, economically, cornering the market as they've done now? We don't make pharmaceuticals in America anymore. They're all made in China, but now they know they can choke those off in a time of conflict. Critical and rare earth minerals that, we have to make computer chips to make our modern economy go. They've cornered the market on that as well. So they're using economic, diplomatic, and asymmetrical tools to try to outmaneuver us. We have to start adapting, bringing those supply chains back home. Really, I think working with the minorities and the dissidents and others that the Chinese Communist government is oppressing, including the Christian population that's going on there that is struggling just to worship and have their faith. And it's all about understanding where the weaknesses on the other side are and applying our strengths. The Chinese Communist Party fully intends to replace the United States as a global leader. They're talking about the decline of the West and Western values. And we need to understand the conflict that we're in and apply the Green Beret mindset, which is by, with, and through others, adaptability, flexibility, resilience, and begin, I think, talking to the American people about the whole of society, whole of government Cold War that the Chinese Communist Party has entered into with the United States.
Congressman Mike Waltz, representing the 6th District in Florida, retired U.S. Army Special Forces and author of the new book, Hard Truths, Think and Lead Like a Green Beret. Congressman, thanks so much for joining us here on the Radio Free Hillsdale Hour.
Hey, thank you. And just by the way, there are no royalties or anything to me personally. It's all going to charity, to the Matthew Pacino Foundation, one of the Green Berets I lost, and other veterans charities. So I just really appreciate the opportunity to talk to you about it.
Up next, we're joined once again by Dr. Patricia Bart from Hillsdale's English Department as we continue our journey through the history of the English language. I'm Scot Bertram. This is the Radio Free Hillsdale Hour.
Hillsdale College is a small, Christian, classical liberal arts college that operates independently of government funding, and we want you or your son or daughter to apply. At Hillsdale, students grow in heart and mind by studying timeless truths in a supportive community dedicated to the highest things. Hillsdale College costs significantly less than other nationally ranked private liberal arts colleges and receives regular recognition as a best value, and nearly all students receive financial aid. Our robust core curriculum, vibrant student life, and 8-to-1 student-to-faculty ratio make for an education like no other. For more information, or to fill out an application, visit hillsdale.edu/info. That's hillsdale.edu/info.
Welcome back to the Radio Free Hillsdale Hour. I'm Scot Bertram. We continue our investigation into the history of the English language with Dr. Patricia Bart, Associate Professor of English here at Hillsdale College. Our first part was a couple of weeks ago. You can find the archive at podcast.hillsdale.edu. When we left off, we were talking with Dr. Bart about how new words developed in the English language. Dr. Bart, let's pick it up there. How do new words evolve and emerge in the English language?
There are subcultures that produce lots of new words, and some of them are more spontaneously created. Journalists and other public writers, okay, not academic writers, heaven help us, but journalists and other public writers that are more popularly distributed, right? School children and teenagers, and now especially with social media,
Yes.
even more so. Emigres and expatriates in contact with local people pick up words, bring them back. Social media users, as we say, and notoriously, gangsters and drug addicts have been among the more creative people linguistically as well, because they may have a need or a desire to exert social pressure or social influence, and then on the flip side of that, they may have a desire to speak secretly, or right so. Words like beatnik have come into the language this way, under the influence apparently of Sputnik, but then of course Nick also, like refuse Nick, there were words like that in the 50s being generated because of the Cold War, having those nicks at the end. You've got the use of bad in the 1980s and the use of sick. And I think it started in the 2000s. This is the first time I ever heard it. And I'm like, this is not sick. It's good. What are you talking about? And like, oh my gosh, I just officially got old, So, and then look, I mean, the cascade of au revoir, sayonara, and hasta la vista, right? I mean, and in English, we don't mean the same thing by them as they are meant in their native language, because in their native language, they're not foreign.
Right.
So that foreignness is part of the meaning of the term. Now there are institutional subcultures as well that actually produce huge swaths of vocabulary in the language, but not popularly.
How do terms develop into categories of common tongue and academic language?
So academics in various disciplines, I have myself invented 3 words that I had to use. I simply had to invent them for a work that I was writing. I just didn't want to repeat verbose explanations each time, right? So I used a more succinct word. But then I think of physicians, the careful naming of diseases and processes of disease, the etiology and things like that, the prognosis, right? You get all these Greek words and Latin words, and it's like, it's not because they want to hide the knowledge of their discipline from other people. It's that in a pan-European and now in a global situation, they want to refer specifically to very particular things, right? So there is that need for the word. Natural scientists, lawyers, heaven help us, right? You got habeas corpus and all those mispronounced Latin words, right? The military, air traffic controllers, general contractors, make contractor grade. What the heck? Anyway, so they produce terms institutionally in a very concerted way, right, for the purpose of sort of consolidating certain precise meanings, right, amongst one another. And then, of course, there are 100% artificial languages from the bottom to the top, right? You got computer languages so that you can sort of talk to machines or, now make them talk back to you in your own language, right? So we know that's going on. But we've also got things like Elvish and Klingon. We've got Esperanto and Interlingua. We've got words, invented by a poet like Brillig or Frabjous, which aren't really in the English language, although I use Frabjous quite a bit, but I mean the opposite. I don't mean it's fabulous. I mean it's like not fabulous, right? But the word chortle comes from that poem, and that one stuck, right? So we have kinds of institutional creation of language as well.
Talking with Dr. Pat Bart from Hillsdale's English Department about the history of the English language. Dr. Bart, how do we name things?
So naming a thing grants us, or it implies that it grants us, a certain power over it, whether that's real or imagined. Because the thing, in any case, if you name it, it becomes manipulable in your thinking and in your speaking and in your influence over other people, right? So we also have words such as the ineffable name of God that Jews and pious Christians will not utter. The word Jehovah comes from that. It's a misreading. The Jews actually put the vowel points of the word Adonai onto his ineffable name so that you wouldn't accidentally read it aloud. It was never meant to be read as Jehovah, right? It just was not, okay? And of course, Bible translators, to this day, if you open your Bible, you might actually never have noticed it, but the word Lord is written in all caps, but you don't notice it's in all caps because the L is a bigger capital than the O-R-D, and that's covering up the ineffable name. So out of respect for not manipulating that name, right, one doesn't utter it. So that gives you a full range of the nature of naming things, I think.
Talking with Dr. Pat Bart about the history of the English language. Now, how does the history of the English language perhaps differ from the history of other languages?
Okay, so the history of the English language differs in the sense that the history of the people who speak it differs from that of other people, although it might parallel that of some further people, right? An illustration might be Latin. I often use this illustration with my students. Latin kind of is a centripetal language. It moved out from the small area of Rome, and as they conquered other peoples, those peoples picked it up. But originally it was a pretty unified language amongst the Roman people, right? And of course today we have all the Romance languages come from it. English is actually a centripetal language. What do I mean by that? It's not a technical term. What I mean by that is it was sort of a basket of peoples all jostling around with each other who were speaking different dialects that were all basically Germanic dialects of some kind, but kind of distinct. And these people mixed with one another in such a way that it produced English. Okay, it wasn't that the Saxons moved to England and speaking the Saxon dialect only, then that dialect developed in England as English. No, that's not how it happened. Saxons, Jutes, Frisians, Angles, all speaking different dialects, mutually intelligible, but different dialects, got together in the island, in the part of the island of Britain that's now England, mostly, and in that sort of jostling amongst one another, layered with Scandinavian influences, so that's a whole other Germanic branch from what German and English are in. It's North Germanic, right? So all of that jostling is what created English, which then went out the way Latin did and began to be spoken by people who perhaps had no contact even with the Germanic language, right? And so brought their own kind of flavor to it. So you get Jamaica, for example, with all those lovely African, perfectly rounded vowels, right? That we don't ever have in English. So pure vowels.
Does language constitute the way we think, or is it the other way around?
Yes. Okay, so I had my joke. All right, but joking aside, I think you're referring to the Sapir-Whorf hypothesis, maybe, that actually says that language very strongly influences our thought, but it tends, when people state it over and over again, to get more and more extreme until it's like language constitutes our thought, right? And so you have Frederick Jameson, for example, in 1972, writes The Prison House of Language, right? All of this goes back to Ferdinand de Saussure's concept of language as a system of signs that are disconnected from the world of the body, the earth, the cosmos. The signifier, that's the sign, right? So if I say bottle or in English, or I say fiasco in Italian, or whatever, Flasche in German, it signifies that object. But Saussure studied language very systematically as a sort of system of signs, not really interested in what the signs might have connected to, right? So the signifier becomes disjunctive from the signified. He studied Indo-European. So, yeah, okay, so he's looking at all these Indo-European languages. They relate to one another, but Indo-European itself is not attested. That means we don't have any remaining written documents in it. So we have to kind of project back theoretically. And so you can see how a lot of his study would become very abstract very quickly. And it's more a relationship, almost like a game of sounds and sound shifts, than it is anything about a real spoken language. So bottom line, I would say, if we're imprisoned by our language, then we would not be able to know it. I think about that for a minute. Okay, so how do we discover that, wow, that word in that word Gemütlichkeit, famous instance, in German, it's just impossible to translate. Well, how do you notice that if you're in the prison house of your language? I mean, you can't. You can't notice things like that. And of course, it's intranslatable. And then people start to translate it and they explain what it means, and then everybody's like, oh, yeah, okay, that's, yeah. Of course, now what they mean is you can't translate it into a single word in English. You have to be verbose about it. And what do we say about inventing words for the purpose of making things less verbose, right? So rock bottom, I would say, like nobody who argues that language, that the signifier has no connection with the signified, goes to a hospital where they're supposed to have their right leg amputated below the knee and comes out with both their arms amputated at the shoulder and doesn't sue over this, right? So come on. Give me a break. When they start doing that, I'll start to respect their position, right? Okay. And we've all also experienced the difficulty, I don't know, maybe academics more so than others, but I think everybody has. I just don't have words to express what I mean. Okay, and I know academics, we're always like, I spend hours in my desk, and people probably think I'm in some kind of trance when I'm just trying to get the right words, right? And sometimes I have to invent them. Other times I have to get verbose. Still other times I just have to sleep on it, and then I figure it out.
So what happens when we get careless about language? Can we unthink grammar?
Can we unthink grammar? Well, I ran a little experiment in ChatGPT, and I told it to write me some word salad. Now, word salad is when you unthink grammar. Okay, sure. They just don't. But the thing is, if you try to produce word salad, it's almost like you can't. You have to memorize a word salad script and then just act like you're making it up. Okay, and of course it's going to give out pretty soon, right? And this is partly, we have discovered is partly because when you're a baby, you've got some kind of linguistic apparatus in your brain. Analogous to, not fully analogous to, but analogous to the way at least you used to have to format a disk before you could use it on a computer. So the formatting would give it the little baskets into which to put data so the data could then be looked up again. Oh, it's in basket number 4 or basket number 20 or whatever, right? And so your brain is fully structured with that. And only if it's damaged in some way does that structure break down, and then the words start to collide together. Well, of course, ChatGPT couldn't produce word salad because it's literally programmed to look for the next statistically likely word to be uttered or printed, right? So I suspected it couldn't, but I just wanted to see if it couldn't, right? So in a way, we can't get careless. I mean, in a way, okay. But, a couple of big ones. Now, this is more semantic, perhaps, than syntactic, but one of the big things that my students do between paragraphs is the segue to the next paragraph will be either the word "and" or a synonym of "and." Moreover, furthermore, also, whatever. And of course, what does that do? It just concatenates ideas. So E and M and C. Okay, Einstein, I think you're getting somewhere, but you come back to me with something better, right? And so you need the logical relationship, right? And you need the squaring and all that stuff, right? And so that's one way in which we are all, by the way, sort of careless at first. Our ideas are kind of a hurricane. I don't care if you're a guy or not, okay? I'm serious about this. Everybody's ideas, if they're new ideas, let's say, okay, if they're not just rote, memorized ideas, but if they're new ideas, they're always in a bit of a hurricane, and they're always easier to string together with, oh, I thought this, and then I thought this, and then I thought that. Okay, get them out there, externalize them, but then you have to add those relationships,
Sure.
which are expressed by various forms of grammar and syntax and other semantic fields than just "and." So that would be one example. There are dozens of examples, of course, of being careless, being more verbose than one need be. It makes it harder for the other person to pick up what you intend.
Right.
You sort of know what you intend, but if you don't try to get precise about that language, you're not communicating it to yourself, as well as, of course, you're not communicating it as well to others.
Talking with Dr. Pat Bart about the history of the English language. Who is Sir William Jones? What are his insights into the relationship among the Indo-European languages?
Okay, Sir William Jones, complete genius. I'm so jealous. He was a Welshman, very well-educated Welshman. Became a lawyer, a jurist, so a lawyer in the very broad sense, too. He studied laws. And he also was really fascinated by languages. I mean, he had learned classical Latin and Greek because everybody did back then. He learned Welsh, and then he studied Persian and Hebrew and Arabic. And so he had early in life a sort of overview of these languages, some of which are related to one another and some of which are not. So Hebrew and Arabic are related, but they're not related to English, even though English has vocabulary from each of them. Actually, in astronomy, there's a lot of Arabic, actually. And of course, there's a lot of Hebrew from the Bible, right? Amen and words like that. But in studying all of those, he then was sent to India to be a jurist and to sort of manage the British legal system there. And it was his thought that, these people they have an ancient culture. I'm going to study their laws to see how they line up with British laws, the common law, right, tradition. And I'm not going to just impose common law on them. I mean, because they have these laws and, I need to study. So he ended up studying Sanskrit and a number of the local languages that were kind of descended from Sanskrit, if you will, though Sanskrit is kind of an artificially produced language, but it is kind of like the Latin of India in a way, a little different, but still we could call it that. And he suddenly realized that German was related not only to English, which it just so clearly is. You don't need to be a genius to notice that, but it's related to Persian. Like, how can that be? And it's related to Hindi. How can that be? That's crazy. Okay, so he has been credited with like sort of being the first person to notice that. Well, he's not the first person to notice that certain Indo-European languages are related to one another, but he is certainly the one who really pushed it as an overall theory and swept in huge numbers of other languages, right, than had been recognized. Swept out certain other languages, like, no, it's not related to Hebrew. Or if so, it is thought, perhaps, that Semitic languages are related to Indo-European at a further level back. And that would kind of make sense, but at much further level back. So that's who he is. He was a member of the Royal Society, and then he was a founding member of the Asiatic Society, which still exists today, that then began to really concertedly study these commonalities amongst the Indo-European languages.
That's Dr. Pat Bart from Hillsdale's English Department. We will continue with more soon on the history of the English language. That will wrap up this edition of the Radio Free Hillsdale Hour. Our thanks to Congressman Mike Waltz from Florida, his brand new book, Hard Truths, Think and Lead Like a Green Beret, and Dr. Patricia Bart from Hillsdale's English Department. The Radio Free Hillsdale Hour is recorded at the studios of WRFH, the student-run radio station at Hillsdale College. Remember, you can hear new episodes every week on this station. You also can find extended versions of some of our interviews or listen anytime to the podcast. Find it at podcast.hillsdale.edu or wherever you get your audio. Until next week, I'm Scot Bertram, and this has been the Radio Free Hillsdale Hour.